Not clickbait, not some anti-Samsung hater rant. We gotta have a grown-up chat. Immediately down in the comments, I'd like to get a sense of why you're watching a video like this. Do you already have a Galaxy S21? Are you shopping or considering an S21? Or are you using another phone, Android, or an iPhone? I'd really like to get a feel for where we're at here with the demographics. I really miss when YouTube would give us the little pop-up polls that we could build into our videos through the cards. At the time this video was shot, I'm about 4 days into using the Galaxy S21, and I've got some serious concerns. I've been pretty vocal about the S21 and the S21 Plus since Samsung announced them. How I feel the phones are a significant step back in features, and how Samsung can front load the hype train, getting YouTubers to mostly focus on the S21 Ultra. The obvious concerns up front: Samsung already killed the headphone jack on Galaxy S phones, no charger in the box, the S20 arrives with an okay feeling plastic back, a lower resolution screen, a flat display, which I do actually prefer, and Samsung has removed the SD card slot and mag stripe support for Samsung Pay in the United States. In the USA, where we don't have quite the same adoption for NFC payments. Cool. And looking back at the S20, similar form factor, similar battery, the same camera hardware, an improved fingerprint sensor, so that is nice, and the S20 launched for $200 less than the S20 did last year. But it is arguably less phone for that price. And the commentary around Samsung's launch this year is what's fueling some of my frustration with this phone. One of the touted upgrades for the S21 is it's one of the first phones with the new Snapdragon processor. So we've seen all manner of synthetic benchmark showing off bigger performance numbers. I can't demonstrate any performance advantages for the S21 over phones from 2020. I'm not saying there aren't any advantages, just I can't show you anything that does in fact perform better. I don't put much stock in synthetic benchmarks. I think they're easy to manipulate, and I don't do my work in Geekbench. I don't edit video in Antutu. I don't write articles or edit photos in 3D Mark. Since leaving Pocket now, I've tried to standardize a series of real-world tests, which you can read up on my testing methods on SomeGadgetGuy.com. I've got that article linked in the description below. The S21 loses to some older phone in every real-world test I perform. It's slower than the V60 in rendering a 4K video in PowerDirector. It's tied with an iPhone SE and slower than a Note 20 rendering video in KineMaster. It's slower at transcoding a longer video than my Surface Duo. Absolutely murked by the Note 20 in using a stabilization plugin. The S21 loses pretty bad to the Xperia 1 Mark II in a longer compression test. And while the S21 manages to outpace most of last year's phones in a huge batch photo processing test, it's the most brutal test that I perform, a gaming phone, the Red Magic 5S, can still beat it. All of these tests were performed by giving the S21 the most gracious consideration for testing, turning the screen refresh down to 60 Hz and enabling the enhanced performance mode, which is obnoxiously buried in the battery settings. That's right. Out of the box, Samsung is throttling this phone, and it takes a bit of digging to flip on all of these claimed performance improvements. You don't get them out of the box. Using the phone with the out-of-the-box settings, most of these performance numbers take a hit, and phones from last year more easily outpace the S21. The S21 heats up faster and performance degrades faster if you aren't testing under the most optimal conditions. The other major claim for this generation: graphics and gaming performance. Comparing the S21 against my OnePlus 8T, both at 1080p with high refresh rate enabled, and firing up one of my favorite games, Undead Horde, not great for the Galaxy. Undead Horde is a fun arcadey title ported from the Switch, and it's all about unit management, and as your character gets more powerful, you control more and more little minions. So it's a fun torture test because the demand on the phone ramps up as you get deeper into the game and control more units and fight more enemies. To be sure, early gameplay starts out strong, but it only takes a couple of minutes before we see the S21 start to slip. I never am able to land on a consistent frame rate. The phone is constantly breathing higher and then slamming lower, and that to me is more distracting. When it jumps up to 60 frames per second, then drops down to the low 30s, and then hovers in the 40s for a bit, and then drops again. The OnePlus, by comparison, never starts out as high, but the swings in performance are much smaller, and the phone is better able to hang in the mid-40s. The performance on the S21 can spike more aggressively, but older phones perform at a higher, more consistent tier. And this would vibe with some of the synthetic benchmarking over on AnandTech, where 2020 phones often still top their performance charts for consistent frame rates. I've been skeptical of reported performance improvements for years now. Apple and now Samsung showing off awesome looking bar graphs, but real world third-party apps never seem to benefit as dramatically from these yearly improvements. To be fair, I would imagine that after a few updates, performance should get better, but this stands in stark contrast to where we've been over the last 4 years of phone manufacturing. On day one, I could show how the V60 was faster than the V50 in most of these tests that I run. On day one, I could show all of these apps run faster on a OnePlus 8 over a OnePlus 7T. On day one, we could see consistent performance improvements comparing an Xperia 1 against an Xperia 1 Mark II. On day one, or technically day 3, the S21 is stumbling against the Samsungs I played with last year. It either matches last year's Galaxies or loses to them if I give the S21 every performance advantage that I can. So now we need to see if this trend continues with other manufacturers. But I'm getting a shadow of a concern, which reminds me of the Snapdragon 810. A chip on paper which was absolutely more powerful than its predecessor, but in practical use, throttled and ended up hotter and slower than the phones that came before it. Like, I've got this amazing 1,000 horsepower engine, but actually building a car around it, it's heavier and slower, putting less power down at the wheels than a better balanced car. Early days, and I'm still testing, but right now, today, I can't recommend the S21 or S21 Plus. It's really a shame that Samsung discontinued the S20 so soon after it launched. We'd have more S20s in stock, in circulation, and the deals on last year's S20 would make it a significantly better buy at present than the current S21. Renewed S20s sell between $600 and $700. Used S20s on Swappa sell between $500 and $600, depending on the condition. It's no surprise that the value of a used S21 has already dropped to under $600. Comparing around $600-ish, the S20 gives you the choice of a faster or higher resolution display, memory card expansion, mag-stripe payments in Samsung Pay. It's a more expensive manufacturing for the glass back and curved OLED, and if not comparable performance, maybe better performance depending on the applications you care about. The only trade-offs I see is 1 year less support for the bigger operating system updates, a better fingerprint sensor on the S21, and I am hopeful that we'll see some radio management, Wi-Fi, LTE, and 5G performance improvements thanks to this new SoC. But the S20 was already a pretty solid 5G performer with support for Wi-Fi 6. You gotta trade a bit for that extra operating system update, the improved fingerprint sensor, and hopefully better networking performance. And I also should point out that this conversation changes a bit when we climb up to the Ultras, where the S20 Ultra camera was never properly sorted out, and Samsung autofocus was pretty miserable for the whole of 2020, even on the notes. The good news is it does help the Ultra feel a little more worth it, but it also makes the S21 feel like even more of a pain point phone to encourage you to up-buy to one of the Ultras. When we focus on the more mainstream Galaxy S devices, it's a much more difficult comparison of pros and cons, where someone might even be able to make an argument for an S20 FE over the S21 depending on what they really need. If you already own an S21, the point of this video is not to try and shame you. I'm not trying to make you like your phone less, but we need to be able to critique the posturing of billion-dollar corporations, especially those that make the boldest claims. There's a reason why Samsung front loads a huge noisy hype train during an embargo period weeks before consumers can really get their hands on these products. There's a reason why reviewers are very careful with their criticisms of Samsung, especially those reviewers that enjoy early access privileges. And there's probably a reason why the SEO on Samsung videos plummets right around the time that the normies can get their hands on actual retail devices. There's a consistent trend of the most die-hard Samsung fans pre-ordering at full MSRP only to see price cuts arriving 2 to 3 weeks after launch. The folks most into Samsung, the people who are really a part of the Samsung lifestyle, are the people most often burned by Samsung business practices. So to those folks, and especially those of you who are still considering your next smartphone purchase, if you like Samsung, I think some savvy shopping on an S20 or even an S20 FE delivers a better all-around price to performance ratio. Now, I have a lot more testing to do. I need to dig into these cameras and fire up some of the more advanced features like DeX, but these early experiences, they're making me a little nervous. Since we don't see a ton of granular performance testing in our gadget reviews anymore, if there's something you'd like to see me try out, a test drive, an app or a service that might help the Galaxy S21 look a bit better, drop some comments down below. I'm always looking to pad out my real world tests. I'm not looking to add more synthetic benchmarks to my testing protocols. As always, thanks so much for watching, for sharing these videos, subscribing to the channel. Supporting your favorite content creators has never been more critical than it is today, especially those of us who don't get on the embargo and pre-release train for the largest companies. So I greatly appreciate those of you who are checking out the links in the description below. Maybe you're shopping some merch. That kind of stuff really does help keep production rolling on this channel. There's a full list of all my affiliates and partnerships over on SomeGadgetGuy.com, or you might consider joining the list of names currently scrolling by from Patreon, patreon.com/SomeGadgetGuy. Those folks get exclusive access to my audio and camera deep dives, and when I started testing the Galaxy S21, they got the sneak peek on some of my early performance test findings. They're basically a collection of the coolest people on the web, so I hope you'll check them out. Now, you know where you can find me around the rest of the internet at SomeGadgetGuy on the Twitters and the Twitch, and the Facebooks and the Instagrams. And I will catch you all on the next video.